Peter Baker is New York Times chief White House correspondent and an MS Now contributor. Brendan Ballou is a former federal prosecutor, former attorney with the DOJ's National Security Division. MS Now senior legal reporter Lisa Rubin is with me in studio. At one point, Pam Bondi pivoted from talking about Epstein to saying that the Dow was over 50,000 and, quote, that's what we should be talking about. She did not want to talk about Jeffrey Epstein, but I did think that Tom Massie was particularly effective in saying, you can't just keep saying, did you ask the Democratic Attorney General about that? We're asking you about what you've done, but do you think anything was accomplished with all of this? Peter?
Oh, sorry. No. Accomplished, no. Look, congressional hearings have always been about theater. They've always been about politics and performative displays of outrage on the one hand and, counter outrage on the other hand. This has gotten to the point, though, where whatever factual information that used to come out of congressional hearings has now basically gone away. This has gone so far down the road toward reality show television rather than, any kind of, exploration of policy or practice, that it's all just about who can find a viral moment that they'll put on their web accounts and their social media accounts and say, see, we're right about this or that. I mean, look, members of Congress, of course, they're political figures. They often act, even disrespectfully to the witnesses. I've never seen, though, cabinet officers come to a congressional hearing, even one that's hostile like this, and act in the way that this attorney general has acted, who's directly insulting the members, using words like hypocrite and joke, and the whole, Donald Trump is here to fix the messes you made. All this is so partisan. It's so, obviously aimed at a target, an audience of one, that, it will not, of course, satisfy anybody on either side, I don't think.
And you were saying, Lisa, in the break that you'd never seen anything quite like this before as well.
Yeah, and I want to put a finer point on something that Peter said. One of the reasons that Bondi's behavior is so aberrational here is that she seems to have come prepared with the equivalent of opposition research on Democratic members, so that when any member who is on the Democratic side is asking her a question and the questioning turns hostile, she then lobs an accusation against them. It's as if one of those binders is filled with bullet points on each and every member. She accused Zoe Lofgren at one point of taking campaign contributions from Democrat Reid Hoffman, who is a Silicon Valley billionaire. Zoe Lofgren said in response, I never did. That's not true. But the hearing went so far afield from what I think the members had intended to focus on. This is not intended to be a pep rally for the president. It is not intended to be a place where each side gets to take partisan pot shots at the other. There were some members there that were really trying to understand things better. And I think the only productive exchange that I saw was the one between Congressman Swalwell and Attorney General Bondi, where Congressman Swalwell was talking about the threats to his family that have emanated from some of the investigations into him, investigations that are no longer ongoing, as he made clear, but that have led to a bunch of really scary threats to he and his family. Threats, he said, cause his children to no longer play outside. That's when the Attorney General, in a very calm voice, pledged to Mr. Swalwell that she would not only brief him off camera, but told the entire committee that none of them should have to face threats to themselves or their family's safety. And I really wish she had made a similar representation to the victims sitting right behind her.
So, Brendan, I want to play part of an exchange with Jerry Nadler when he was asking her again about the Epstein survivors, and Bondi again refused to answer.
How many of Epstein's co-conspirators have you indicted? How many perpetrators are you even investigating?
First, you showed it. I find it.
How many have you indicted?
Excuse me. I'm going to answer the question.
Answer my question.
No, I'm going to answer the question the way I want to answer the question.
No, you're going to answer the question the way I asked it.
You can let her filibuster all day long, but not on our watch. Not on our time. No way. And I told you about that, Attorney General, before you started.
You don't tell me.
Yeah, I did tell you because we saw what you did in the Senate.
You're a lawyer, not even a lawyer.
What's your reaction, Brendan, to what you saw, the way Pam Bondi decided to come into this hearing and the way she conducted herself?
Yeah, so two things. One is on tone, and this is a little bit of free legal advice. If you start getting tough questions from a judge, don't start personally insulting the judge. And it seems like that was the approach that AG Bondi took here, at least in Congress. I think it's important to understand, Peter made the good point that this was a performance for an audience of one and the president. But there are other people watching this, in particular, line-level prosecutors within the Department of Justice and judges that are going to be overseeing these cases. And I will say that this sort of tone, this sort of approach, really has a follow-on impact in terms of the credibility of the Department of Justice. I mean, we're obviously seeing that credibility wash away in the fact that it wasn't able to secure indictments against 6 Democratic elected officials most recently, any number of failed indictments in the District of Columbia. And so, unfortunately, I think that this performance is part of a larger sort of erasure or attack on the longstanding credibility of DOJ. On the substance, I'll say, it's not surprising to me. In fact, I think it's appropriate for Attorney General Bondi not to name or say how many people related to Jeffrey Epstein were under investigation. Department of Justice doesn't comment on ongoing investigations for good reasons. I do think that the hearing so far has put good pressure in showing essentially what I would call the indifference of the Attorney General to some of the suffering of Epstein's victims. But to Peter's point, that alone probably is not really going to make a difference in how this administration behaves. Instead, I'll just make a suggestion here, which is, ultimately, it's pretty clear that the administration is not in compliance with the Epstein Transparency Act. If they are going to get the administration in compliance, it's not going to happen through hearings. It's going to happen through litigation and probably a lawsuit under what's called the Administrative Procedure Act. That's the only way to get the independent oversight over the production of documents here that is actually going to get the administration in compliance with the law.
Well, Peter, you have to imagine that President Trump appreciated Bondi's combativeness. It's one of the things he likes about her. But the DOJ does have to go to court all over the country every day. They have to argue for this administration. So to the point about the reputation of DOJ, you wonder what bigger impact this has, or if you hear anything in Washington, D.C. about concerns regarding that.
Well, look, the Attorney General is obviously a political appointee, right? The Attorney General represents the president who appoints him or her. But there has traditionally been a sense, at least among modern attorneys general, they had a larger, higher calling, that they were not just political actors, that they were there to represent justice in a broad sense, that they were not there just as the personal attorney for the president. You saw her time and time again making such partisan statements, which I don't recall ever seeing any attorney general, Democrat or Republican, doing in this kind of a circumstance. Not to say that they don't get into contentious back and forth with the Congress, yes, but not in sort of very personal, partisan, insult politics kind of way. And to Lisa's point, the opposition research that she clearly had there for members so she could try to embarrass them and so forth. That's just not the way it's ever worked in Washington. It does have an impact. It does have an impact on the credibility for line prosecutors, as I said, across the country. And they have had, one loss after another on some things that are pretty extraordinary. And right now, the Justice Department is seen as a partisan instrument of power rather than a neutral arbiter of justice.
I want to play some of what, before the hearing, the survivors who sat through it had to say. Take a listen.
Pam, I have a clear and simple message for you. The way this administration, and you specifically, have handled survivors has been nothing short of a failure.
The people who had the authority to intervene chose silence, secrecy, and self-preservation and called it justice. I'm here to make sure no one in the Justice Department, no matter their title, rewrites history or escapes accountability.
This time, it isn't a monster pedophile who is doing the exploiting, but our very own government.
Lisa, Bondi said that Epstein survivors, if they contacted DOJ and told them that identifying information had been included in this release. The information had been taken down. I want to know if that's the case and what you make of the, I don't want to call it anger, I don't want to, but the statements by some Republican members of Congress who are clearly upset that some of their information, notably phone numbers, had been collected separately.
Well, let's talk first about the truth or falsity of what Pam Bondi said this morning. Pam Bondi may believe what she said was true, but I can tell you, based on a search of the Epstein files this morning on the department's own website, it's not true. I know multiple survivors who are represented by quality, competent counsel who have told me they have been in touch with the Department of Justice on behalf of clients, and multiple survivors' names are still in the files as we speak today. And they are in the files not just with respect to unredacted court documents, for example, but email exchanges and the like, the sort of documents that were supposed to be redacted from the get-go. To your point, though, I think one of the things that was hardest to watch is the outrage that many Republican members were feeling about their phone records becoming a part of the Arctic Frost investigation. That's what eventually became Jack Smith's investigation and led to the fake electors or election interference case against President Trump. Again and again, we heard from people who felt their own civil rights, their own privacy was violated because the department had their phone records. And it was done without any self-awareness of the violations that the department has committed as against the women who have already been victimized by Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, who are sitting right behind Pam Bondi. So in addition to the fact that Bondi didn't want to turn around and confront them, the lack of self-awareness, the self-absorption of those members, I thought was particularly stunning.